Tonight we're going to talk about Android Flash development. This is probably a little bit of a different topic than what you guys are usually used to seeing in an Android user group, but Flash actually is a very viable platform for developing applications for Flash, and we're going to show you examples of that, actually running on some Android devices and have a little bit of fun, hopefully. So my name's Stephen Chin. I work for a company called GXS. I'm their Chief Agile Methodologist. That's my day job. Evenings, weekends, I tinker with technologies. Probably best known for writing the Pro JavaFX book. Now, if you take JavaFX and you put it together with web fundamentals, so this is my co-presenter, Oswald Campesato. He wrote the Web 2.0 fundamentals book. Very active in the user group community as well, so you guys have probably seen him around. And when you merge these two things together, obviously you get a pro Android Flash book, right? Obviously. So this is our upcoming book with A-Press. We're shooting for a May-ish release. You can actually already pre-order it on Amazon. You might see some of the examples we show tonight appearing in that book. But there's a whole lot more stuff that we're not going to cover, which we're going to go into more detail in the book. So this is kind of the beginning Flash development presentation we're going to give you guys tonight. So slight disclaimer, this is all bleeding edge development. We are not Adobe employees, neither Oswald nor I. We do not reflect the opinions of Adobe, product statements, et cetera, et cetera. We're also not responsible for outbreaks of spontaneous Android Flash hacking. So if you guys go home and scare your coworkers by doing Flash development, we're not responsible. So hack responsibly. All right, so the two technologies which serve as deployment mediums for Flash applications are basically you have the choice of the Flash player. This is going to be in your mobile browser. This is what you typically see inside of a browser application if you had advertisements or games running in the browser. And this is available on Android phones today. The Motorola Droid was the first phone which shipped with Flash within the browser by default, but most other Android devices are catching up quickly and also supporting Flash out of the get-go. You need to have, let me see if I got this right, Froyo support 2.2 to run this. So if your device is not 2.2 enabled, you probably don't have Flash support, but once you get upgraded to 2.2, you will get this. With a Flash browser, you're kind of restricted to kind of sandbox restrictions in the browser. So you're not going to be able to do everything you'd like to with device APIs. Accessing the file system, anything which would violate security is not going to be allowed. And it will run on most smartphones, but not the iPhone. This is Steve Jobs' thing. He doesn't like Flash. It doesn't run on the iPhone. But there is a way to get Flash on your iPhone. And that's with Adobe AIR. So Adobe AIR is the kind of the desktop or the installed version of the Flash runtime. It actually has a bigger footprint, supports more APIs. You can actually get full access to a lot of native capabilities by using Adobe AIR. Also, by using the iPhone packager, you can package up kind of the necessary AIR bits with your application and deploy that to the iPhone store and actually ship your Flash application for an Apple device via the storefront. So conveniently, there is a way to get around the restriction of not running our content in the browser. Most other devices, so Android has AIR support. BlackBerry, I don't know if you guys have been following the latest news on tablets. I don't want to steal too much of Oswald's thunder here, but BlackBerry also is firmly committed to supporting Flash and AIR on their devices. And I can't speak for Adobe and all their partnerships, but they have a whole kind of open screen project where they're working with Palm and all the other major phone vendors to make sure that Flash is on different devices and is available everywhere where you normally run applications or have content for consumers. So one of the advantages, and this is the reason why this is a really interesting technology, is Adobe kind of focused in on Android as the first platform which they're fully supporting and putting a lot of effort behind making sure that it has the full capabilities and allows you to build full-featured applications. But the same application you develop on Android is going to run on other platforms that they support in the near future. So it gives you some ability to write the application once and then get multiple different devices that you can run it against. So latest version of Adobe AIR right now is 2.5.1. Most of the stuff we're talking about will actually run on a slightly newer release of AIR once that actually comes out and gets pushed down to production. And this is all bleeding edge stuff. So a lot of the stuff we're going to talk about right now, like all these products, don't actually exist yet. I'll talk a little bit about where you can get beta versions of these and actually start with the technology now. We don't work for Adobe. We can't commit to release time frames or give anything other than the general statements they give about when they want to target these technologies. The general statement on all of these technologies, CS 5.5, Adobe Flash Builder 4.5, is spring timeframe is when they're targeting. There's a number of different tools. Basically the model Adobe has for how they actually support the technology is the runtime's free and the applications you can freely deploy. They don't charge royalties or anything like that. But a lot of the tooling which they provide is not free. So they have their whole Creative Suite 5.5. Flash Professional is a part of that Creative Suite, and that's actually one of the mechanisms you can create applications and deploy them to the Adobe AIR runtime. Another one is the Adobe Flash Builder, and this is an Eclipse-based plugin, and it's numbered slightly differently than the Creative Suite line because it was previously released separately. But really, it has become an integral part of their overall product suite. And this allows you to build applications within an actual full-featured IDE. You can use Eclipse, build large, complex applications, and integrates well with their Flex libraries, which is the next one. And what Flex is if you think about, so I'm going to back up for a sec for folks who aren't familiar with Flash and Flex. So Adobe Flash Professional has been around for quite a while. So what it's really targeted at is, allowing graphics professionals or folks who want to build content, rich content. It provides, timelines and then drag and drop object creation, and you can draw graphics and create reasonably complex graphic with writing very little code. You can dig down and do full-featured code in ActionScript, which is essentially JavaScript, but it gives you quite a bit of graphics capabilities out of the box. Flash Builder and Flex, on the other hand, are focused more on your typical application developer, somebody who wants a full widget toolkit, buttons and skins and graphics out of the box, layouts and controls and things to quickly build business professional applications. So if you're somebody building enterprise business applications, you definitely fall down here on the Flex side and probably be more interested in the Flash Builder side of things. If you're doing design or you're doing game development, you'd probably fall more on the Flash Professional side of things. I'll show examples of both tools, and since ActionScript's the underlying language in both tools, you can pretty much portably move between the two. You can open your Flash Professional project files in Flash Builder, edit them seamlessly, go back and forth between the tools, so it's fairly seamless. Okay, so next guy down here is Flash Catalyst, and this integrates well with Flash Builder, lets you do some things like creating skinnable buttons and things via graphical user interface. And this is a fairly new product, which is why it's version 1.5. They're also targeting mobile support for this, but I'm not going to show any examples of this tonight, so this is more informative. And then likewise, Device Central is kind of a suite application which lets you browse different mobile applications, mobile profiles, has some emulation capabilities so you can emulate devices and rotate them or do touch gestures within the user interface. I'm also not going to show examples of this because we have real phones, but that's also something which, when it finally gets released, it'll probably be a valuable debugging tool and also testing on different devices. CS5 is the current market version of Flash Creative Suite. Adobe Flash Builder 4 is the current market version of the Flash Builder line. Neither of those support mobile development out of the box. At the end, I'll point you guys to some pre-release programs going on. The pre-release for Adobe Flash CS5 actually is you need a copy of CS5, but then you install a plugin which gives you the mobile capabilities. And that will be equivalent to what CS 5.5 has when it comes out. All right, so we've probably done enough talking. So we're going to show some examples of what you can do quickly to build applications. So the first application I'm going to show is basically a little capability explorer written inside Flash. And the goal here was to have the minimal code to give some features and then some information about your device. So this is the Flash Professional UI, which I'll bring up in a sec. This is all the code which we're going to use. I think I have a few extra properties mixed in here, but basically, this is a big string statement. It's a big concatenated string. And we're just checking static properties. So capabilities.manufacture, who made the phone. Capabilities.os, what operating system the phone's running on. So this is really not complicated coding, but you can do quite a bit using the design tool with Flash and then mixing in a little bit of ActionScript. All right, so this is the Flash Builder UI, and basically, you know, this didn't take very long, but I mocked up some graphics here. So you know, popped in a big text area here. So you got a little text area component, and then we've given, it's a movie clip, and it's an instance of color. That's not the text guy. Where's the text guy? Here's the text guy. So there's a movie clip, and you probably can't read it, but the idea of this is capability scroller. So from within the action script, we can access the capability scroller object and then set properties on it. So we're just going to set the text. And then the actual movie itself is simply going to slowly roll this up. So it's a timeline which, over a minute or two, slowly rolls the text up. So it has a little backdrop, has a big text field we're going to populate, and then it just scrolls it up the screen. So it's pretty trivial stuff. The actual code, and I tried to make this as massive as possible, so we'll see how this works out. All right. All right, so this is the same code I showed in a little bit better pretty printed. And you can see it just concatenates a whole bunch of properties and assigns it to the capability scroller here. So we're just assigning it to the capability scroller. And then I did some funky thing with a color mask thing because I wanted to fade the text at the top and bottom so it would like fade in and out. So I used that blue and black rectangle in the background as kind of a mask to do a fading effect. And that was about it. And I'm by no means a Flash professional expert, so I'm more of a Flash Builder guy personally. All right, so if we run this on the local environments, we can see that it runs beautifully, and we have, what do we have here? MP3, hardware disable, playback, debugger true. Okay, this is an Adobe Macintosh, Mac OS 10.6.5. Pixel aspect ratio is 1, desktop player, color, 72 DPI, 1152 by 870, no touch screen. So that's if you run it locally. I mean, the same Flash application, you can deploy it to desktop, you can deploy it to mobile. So let's, instead of running it locally, let's deploy it to this guy. Anyone recognize this phone? You guys are Android experts. You should know this. All right, yeah. This is the Google Nexus 1. I'm very thankful for the Google folks for their generous loan of a phone to do testing on. And we will publish the application to the phone. Now, because you guys can't see it easily, I have a little Android screencast running, so it's exactly the same thing on the phone with a horrendous refresh rate. but it shows up on screen, so it's fairly easy to see. Okay, so same application. This is actually running on the device now. And when we actually get to some interesting properties, all right, English language, Android Linux is the manufacturer, OS is Linux kernel 26329-27240. Screen DPI is 254. Did anyone know that's the Nexus 1 screen resolution? Resolution is 40 by 800. Touch type is finger, and then it supports gesture events and 2 touch points. So pretty simple example, running on the phone. You get an idea of what you can do very, very quickly to build an application deployed to the phone. And the same application which was deployed to the desktop is running flawlessly on our phone device. Yeah, it's running within the AIR runtime. I can actually show you guys the AIR application which is sitting on the phone. The way it works is it's a dependent application, so your application you deploy to the store will depend on the AIR 251 runtime, and then when a user downloads it, it'll automatically grab AIR 251 and install that as well. For development purposes, whenever you deploy to the phone, it checks the current version of AIR to make sure it's up to date. If it's not, it'll prompt you and say, do you want to update your version of AIR or install it, and then it'll take care of it for you. So it's fairly smart about that sort of stuff.
Will it launch AIR first before it comes up, or does it just come up?
Yeah, it just comes up, you launch the application, it's seamless. But in the background, it's running the AIR runtime. Yeah, so as a developer, the first time you deploy your application to the phone, it will install the AIR runtime for you or upgrade it, and then it'll install your application and launch it. For the end user, somebody who's actually going to pull your app from the App Store, they'll find your application to run it. It'll have a dependency against the AIR application, which is also in the Google Market. And then when they install that application, it will ask them, and it will install the Adobe AIR runtime. For the first time, the next application, which depends on AIR, they just have to download their application, and it already has the AIR runtime installed. All right, so let me go back to my slides. And one other screen, which I didn't show you but is nicely represented in the slides here, is the publish dialog. So one of the dialogs which you can use to configure your AIR is this publication dialog, and I click the publish command. If you hadn't configured AIR, they would pop this dialog up for the first time. And basically, it asks you for your app ID, portrait landscape mode. You can set full screen, you can set auto rotation. So there's quite a few properties here that you can use to affect your application. These are things you would typically put in like your Android XML file for your application descriptor. You can actually create an application descriptor and include that in your project instead of specifying them here. So this is the GUI form of doing the same thing. And they also have a second page which does certificates and all that good stuff. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about devices. Since you guys are Android experts, there will be a question coming up which I'm going to depend upon you guys to answer for me. All right, so one of the features of Android, unlike iPhone or some other platforms where they've kind of standardized on the hardware and the screen size and all the things, Android's gone the opposite route. They've said everybody can use our, we have a platform, it's open source, everybody can build applications that this will run on, build devices this will run on. But as a result, you have a huge variety in different resolutions. So this is just a smattering of different random Android devices. Also, different screen sizes, physical sizes of the screen, and densities of the screen. So as a result, when you're building an application, you have to take more care in making sure that you have different graphics assets for different sizes. You handle different layouts for different aspect screens. So there's more work as an application developer you have to do. But if you do it correctly, for the end user, it's actually a better experience because whatever device they run it on, it's going to run smoothly even if they get a higher resolution display or they have different devices they upgrade to. So that's all good stuff. This is a comparison of the screen resolution versus the physical size. So the outer guy here is a Google Nexus 1, which is 800 by 480 pixels and 3.7 inches. Compared to the HTC Hero, it's 480 by 320 pixels, but the screen size is fairly big. It's actually 3.2 inches. So you can see that the physical dimensions and then the screen size vary quite a bit. And the last one here is an Xperia Mini X10. And that's 240 by 320, but again, it's 2.55 inches, so it's fairly large. So if you were designing a user interface for a touch point, this thumb size here is, I think it's about 0.8, 0.9 of an inch, which is the minimum size. They did a study at one of the universities for the minimum size people can manipulate screens with their thumbs accurately. So this is the smallest you'd want to have a physical touch point on the device. If you look at it from a resolution standpoint, well, it's from a screen size standpoint, it's all the same, right? Because the physical size of the screen has to match their thumb in terms of the minimum device. But the actual screen resolution, so on the Mini, you can have a fairly small graphic and it's still hittable because the density is low. On the Google Nexus 1, you have to have a massive graphic, otherwise the user can't physically manipulate it. So this gives you an example of why it's so important to actually care about density of the device. So Android defines 4 different density levels. For the AIR APIs, they left off 1, so they just did medium, high density, and the new extra high density, which is the latest version of Android. Now, as far as I know, the closest device to extra high density is the new Motorola Atria, the one they just announced at CES. What? Atrix. But it's actually slightly below the threshold. So the threshold in AIR is it has to be above 280 for it to be considered high density. And I think it's like 278, so it's like two below. So as far as I know, there aren't actually any devices which qualify, at least by the AIR definition, for extra high density. But I think the reason they put this in is for the future, as you get higher density devices, like the new iPhone 4s would definitely qualify for extra high density because they have so many pixels you can actually use them. So just to give you ideas of how density works and how you use it within the AIR APIs, I created a little sample application called the Density Explorer. And basically what this does is you can choose an author density. So in a Flex application, your author density is the density for which your application was targeted at. So you can say my application is designed for a 240 pixel per inch screen, and it's going to scale it based upon the target device. The second thing is it has a little slider here, so you can choose a device DPI for different devices. And has a little picture here, which will update as you slide, so you can see different phone pictures which are close. And at the bottom here, it tells you the adjusted device density, which in this chart here, it would be, if you're in this range, below 200, it would be 160. If you're 200 to 280, it would be 240. If you're above 280, it would be 320. And it also tells you the scale factor, which is what it's going to scale. And just like Android does for their density implementation, it scales in reasonable multiples so that you don't get weird pixel aliasing or things if you don't have exactly the right graphics. So there's a few thresholds it scales at. And this is also a good example of Flash Builder. So this is the second tool you can use to build Flash applications. And it's my choice. Okay. So this is a really simple application. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail on this first one, but when I mentioned you can go in and directly modify your application descriptor, this is the file you could basically put whatever you want in for your deployment. So your application, where it's going to be deployed, namespaces, version, whether you auto-orient, a whole bunch of other properties I haven't implemented, buttons, icons, Android permissions. So They have this commented nicely so you can get an idea of the different capabilities, but I didn't make any changes to this for this application. The main application consists of 2 files.
You're blocking the screen a little bit.
Oh, thank you. How's that? The main application consists of 2 files. So there's a main file here, which is a View Navigator application. And basically what this is saying is I want to create an application which is going to have a menu at the top to navigate between different subviews. And the first subview I would like to be main home view, which is the other file. This is also where you specify your author density. So when you deploy the application, you can choose what density you want to have it work with. In this case, I chose 240 ppi. Just for kicks, because I like doing things which possibly cause demo risk, we're going to change it to 320 on the fly. This way you guys know it's real and it wasn't all canned demo. All right, and the other file is the actual view itself. Now, basically, this adds a bunch of components. So here's all the different devices, the different pictures I've embedded in here. And the main application layout, and this is the MXML format for defining your graphics, so it's a declarative format, is it basically adds a border container with some properties for color and size, sets it to a vertical layout, and then adds in some labels and some other items to this. So it's fairly straightforward code. This is the entire user interface down here. And there's a little bit of scripting code up here, which actually deals with orientation change events. So it can change the layout when it's horizontal and vertical. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and run this application. All right, so this is a Motorola Droid 2. It has pretty similar hardware to the Nexus 1, slightly taller screen. It does the full wide VGA, FW VGA or something like that. And for Flash Builder, you can run applications simply by clicking Run here. You can also debug applications, and it will automatically do USB debugging with your device and then give you back print line statements, allow you to step through different lines. So it's actually pretty well integrated. So what's the question? Yeah, so I'm using the i5 build, which is one version higher than what you can get in the pre-release I'm going to mention at the end. The only difference, and I've tried these applications on the current available pre-release, the current available beta, and then the pre-release version I'm using here, is when I write View Navigator application, in your application you have to write mobile application. But what I show in the slides is closer to what will be the final released version. Okay, so this is the application. Oh, I can't do it there. I just do it here. All right, so we can drag here. And it fades in and out. It's really hard to see on the screen there, but once I pass around the device, you'll see it's just better. You can choose different auto densities. And it tells you at the bottom, it's a little hard to see, but the scale factor here is going to be 2/3. So if we start with a 240 ppi application, and then our device DPI is 170, then it's going to scale it down. I think that's right. And the other thing this application does is, this is a preview for the next thing we're going to do, is it automatically adjusts the layout when you turn on its side. So you notice the graphics moves to the other edge, and then you move it back, it changes the layout. So you can hook into the landscape portrait events and then modify your layout dynamically based upon the orientation of the device. Now here is a visual example of different author densities and how it affects your application. So I took these screenshots with different settings for the author density of the application. Author density is read exactly once on startup of the application, so you can't change it dynamically. It makes sense because you probably if you're setting an author density, that's because you've designed your application to be 240 ppi, so you don't need to be dynamically changing it. But you can see here on the left, 160 ppi for author density, and it actually doesn't quite work because it scales it so much that it actually gets cropped. My application wasn't designed for a density this low, so if I was going to design for 160 ppi, I would probably move the controls around and lay them out differently. If I had an author density of 240 ppi, you can see it's actually perfectly aligned. And that's actually the density I started with when I was developing the application. If you took this to a different device, like if you took this to a little Xperia Mini, then what it would do is it would shrink everything down by a scale factor of whatever it was, like 0.5 or 0.6. And then if you took it to a higher density device, an extra high density device, it would scale the graphics up. So it's going to keep the ratio and the size about the same. And then if you set it to 320 ppi, which is what I just made the code change to do on this device, you'll notice that there's quite a bit of white real estate left over. So I could design an application for 320 ppi, extremely high density. If I then ran it on a lower density device, it would scale the graphics down, so you would have the same equivalent ratio of white space to components. So this is pretty similar to how Android deals with density. One of the differences is since there's a lot of vector graphics going on, they can do quite a bit to automatically scale your application using Flex and Flash. But a lot of the same concepts apply, and something which I've heard that they're working on, but I don't think the answer is quite out there yet, is they're going to do something similar to graphics. So you can have different bitmap graphics versions for different densities as well. Same thing with resources in Android today. The three topics we're going to go in a little more detail on is I'm going to talk a little bit about multi-touch, a little bit about rotation of the device, and Oswald's going to go into whole detail about different types of app devices like tablets and TVs and other aspect devices. And then the rest of these are all the different AIR APIs which are supported. I'm not going to go into detail on these, but read the book. I'm supposed to pump my book here, so I get to say that occasionally. Okay, so screen orientation. I showed how it worked in a Flex application shortly. The actual mechanism in ActionScript to hook up events is you add an event listener that's going to listen to the screen orientation change event. You can do this from Flash applications or from your Flex code, and then you create a callback function, and then the callback function will get an event handler which has one of these values for the screen orientation, whether it's left or right or up or upside. Pretty standard stuff. This is a really simple code snippet which it sets a screen orientation change listener which simply plays a movie. And this is, again, a super simple code sample of what you can do in Flash to do screen orientation changes on a device. So we're going to go back to Flash now. Okay, so we're going to do our rotating smile example. Now, this guy looks pretty happy, right? This is about the extent of my artistic skills. I apologize. All right, and we're going to make him slightly less happy. So all I did is I added another frame here with a slightly less happy smiley guy. And I did a bunch of shape morphs on the different layers. So you get a little animation effect. So the clouds roll in, and this is all stuff which if you guys had a designer, they'd actually create something which was professional and looked good, as opposed to a little sample application, but you get the idea. Yeah, so if you use any of the drawing tools inside of Flash Professional, it's all vector graphics. You can also import from Illustrator or other tools which do vector graphics, and that's going to give you the best scaling on different device sizes. Bitmap graphics you might want to use for complicated portions of the UI where you'd have lots of fine detail so you don't bog down the processor. But so far, I've had pretty good success with vector graphics on performance. So the code for this application is very simple. So same thing I showed in the slides, but it basically adds an event listener and plays the clip every time you rotate. So it couldn't be simpler. I again am going to start up the guy here. All right. We're screencasting again. Okay, and we'll do a little publish here. So here's the publish settings dialog I didn't show last time. And you can also set certificates and deployment types, whether you're deploying to device or emulator, all this great stuff. But we're just going to publish. Okay, so I got my device up. So you're gonna validate that this is real as opposed to being faked by a movie clip or something I loaded. Okay, so we got a happy smiley. Let's rotate him. All right, not very happy. It's happy again. All right, so you guys have probably seen these pictures before. These are courtesy of our friends at GestureWorks. And these are the 5 basic gestures that Flash supports out of the box. So you can do 2-finger taps, rotation, zoom. You can pan with 2 fingers, so put 2 fingers and drag to pan an object. And you can also do swipe gestures on the phone, single finger swipes. So, I mean, pretty standard stuff. You've probably seen lots of mobile applications which use these. One of the nice things is it's kind of out of the box. If you turn gesture support on, it's going to automatically recognize these and fire these events for you in your application, which makes it fairly simple to use. Very similar mechanism to hook up the listeners. So you call add event listener in bold, give it a rotate listener, which is a function, and then that function can take some action. So it's fairly straightforward, and it gets passed in an event object, which has information like for a rotation event. It tells you the delta rotation since the last event call. So in this case, I'm simply doing a plus equals on the object rotation. So each time the event gets called, it's going to rotate the object. Similarly, like a translate event or a pan event gets called for every incremental movement, so you can animate objects across the screen as the user gesture occurs. Swipes are single dispatch at the end of the gesture. So at the end of the swipe, you get a single call, which tells you the direction of the swipe, whether it was up, down, left to right, etc. Here's an example of swiping. So you'll notice here that the syntax I'm using on this slide for hooking up the event is a little bit different and a little bit more concise. So this is the MXML syntax. It's an XML declarative syntax for defining your Flex applications. They define events for each of the different gesture types. Again, these are on the interactive object class, which everything extends. So you can basically do this on anything which appears on the screen. And you can hook it up to a function here and then have it directly call this. So this gets rid of the need to, in some place, add event handler code with the big constant and then the function you're going to hook it up to. You can simply add it into your MXML code like this, which is usually much terse and easier to write if you're coding. But it has exactly the same effect. Question? Okay, so the question is how you can handle an application which does both mouse and touch events. So in there's an input mode setting for Flash, and there's 3 different input modes you can choose. You can choose gesture input mode, and when you're in gesture input mode, you'll get gesture events, and you'll also get mouse events. You can choose touch point. Is that what it is? Touch point? I think it's touch point. Touch point mode, and when you're in touch point mode, it will generate like touch begin, touch ends for possibly multiple fingers, and that's the low-level API if you want to directly access it, and it will also dispatch mouse events at the same time. And the third thing is you can set gesture handling off. You can set it to none, input mode none. In that case, you just get mouse events. So if you want your application to have the most compatibility, you can process mouse events. So mouse clicks, mouse presses, mouse rollover, all of those events will be dispatched for touch displays the way you'd expect them to. And if you use those instead of the equivalent touch event, then your application is portable to desktop. if you do use any of the gestures, which are not going to be available for a non-touchscreen UI, what you probably want to do with your application, assuming that you can't enforce a particular type of device or a particular support in terms of number of touch points or gesture support, is you'd probably want to provide menus or other mechanisms to accomplish the same thing, which might be more tedious or cumbersome for the end user, but would give them equivalent functionality. So does that answer your question? OK, so example time again. All right, back to Flash Builder. You notice a pattern here. We're going back and forth. And we've got our mobile picture book application. So basically, what this application is going to do, and there's a little bit more code involved in this, but the samples I showed for swipe events were from this application, and the sample I showed for rotation and zooming was also for this application. What this application does is it shows a few images on screen and allows you to manipulate them. So this is the Multitouch image class. It's basically a wrapper around the normal flex image. And then what it does is it adds a bunch of event listeners for resizing and transforming. If you notice, rotate, zoom. OK, there's another guy, which I'll show you in a sec. But it adds the listeners here, and it just adds the rotation to scale, similar to what I showed on the screen. For dragging, rather than using the touch events for dragging, what makes more sense to do, and this makes your application more portable to a non-gesture enabled UI, is to simply grab the normal drag events. So in this case, I do mouse down, mouse up events, do a normal drag, and this works equally well on a touch screen or a desktop screen. So this gives you draggability support for dragging the icons around. And then swiping is in the ActionScript classes, the XML, or the MXML classes rather. So an example of that would be I'm in the wrong spot. Here, scrapbook page. All right, so this guy sets a pan event handler. 2-finger taps. Oops. So it adds a bunch of 2-finger tap event handlers. So with this, when you try this application, if you click with 2 fingers on one of the images, that will zoom in on the image and open it up in a full screen view. And if you press the back button or press 2 fingers on it again, it'll go back to the previous view. So let me run the application, and then I could show you guys this in action. OK. We got our screencast up. OK, so this is the basic application I have on screen. So you guys will get a chance to try this. You can drag pictures around. You can zoom on pictures. You can rotate pictures. No, rotate, rotate. My fingers are a little sticky, so. All right, you get the idea. Now, if you take a picture and you click with 2 fingers on it, come on. Ah, all right, there we go. All right, so that was a 2-finger tap. And then you can either 2-finger tap on it again or click the Android back button to go back again. And the other thing for swiping is on the Flash scrapbook title, if you swipe it, it will change the set of pictures showing to a few different sets of pictures. All right, so we got one more example application. I'm going to turn it over to Oswald. So I mentioned a little bit about the Touchpoint API for getting low-level events, so you can actually do your own gestures or complicated stuff with touch events. And there's a lot more events that get fired. This is the full list. You get a lot more of these fired because every time the user moves or touches or does anything, you're getting like a bajillion events. But it's extremely powerful in what you can do because you can actually have things which track mouse cursors around the screen, or you can do things with the pressure applied to the screen, so it gives you quite a bit more flexibility in terms of what you do with your Touch API. For this example, I'm simply going to use begin, end, move to track the mouse cursor moving around the screen, and the touch tap event, which is a single kind of tap event on the screen. And this is kind of a proxy event. It's something which is getting generated based on other events underlying the system. But it's convenient in that it'll fire a single event like a mouse click when the user taps on an object. All right, so I'm not going to go into too much detail on these. If you guys are interested, I'll have all the slides posted on my blog post-presentation. And I'm also going to put the samples you guys saw on my blog, probably not all at once, but I'll get at least one initially and then continue posting over the next couple weeks. But here is our next application, snake application. This may look complicated, but there's actually a little brush which draws flowers for you. So this is really simple. It's a yellow background with like a quick brush stroke across. I added a few symbols here. So the background, a blue ball. It's just a blue sphere with a gradient on it. A green ball, and this, it's a green sphere. And then the red ball, and the red ball I put a few faces on just for kicks. So this is what happens when you're up to like 4 a.m. coding, writing your book. You come up with quirky ideas which your readers might not actually appreciate. But I got my happy smiley, and my, oh, you guys can't see this, can you? All right, I'll show it on, I'll let you guys see it on the device. But there's a few different faces. Okay, and the actual code for this is super trivial. Boop, boop, boop. Okay, so basically, same deal at the top here. Add a bunch of event listeners, begin, move, end. I added a key down listener. Key down listeners are actually the way you handle these buttons at the bottom there. There's a special constant for each of the Android buttons. So if you click the menu button on the application, be careful not to click back because that'll exit the application. If you click the menu button, it will clear out all of the little snakes which you've drawn so far. And you're going to want to do that because if you get too many sprites on the screen at once, it does kill your performance. So this is also an effective way to test how performant your application, your device is. And then the key listener clears out all the stuff. There's a little change face guy here which just plays that movie to change the face. So if you tap on any of the snake faces, it'll change the face. And then a begin and end listener here, which basically, as you're moving around the screen, it's just going to dump sprites up on screen. The first touch point, the primary touch point, there's a variable you can check, is primary touch point. And we set that to a green ball. And then any other touch points, there's only 2 on this device, but if you had multiple, they're all going to be blue if you had multiple fingers. So if you do 2 finger snaking, then you can get blue and green snakes. All right, and again, our last time we'll need to do this, reboot the Android screencast. And we have it running up here. So actually, I need a volunteer. Would you like to volunteer, sir? So why don't you stand here on the side so we don't block the screen. But I mean, this is one of the applications which is just kind of fun to play and mess around with. So just touch the screen and see what you can do. Okay, try dragging or. All right. Oh, we got the blue. You got the blue balls. Cool. Click on one of the faces too. That also. All right. So it's a little hard to see the faces on screen, but they look pretty sad now.
Cool, Christmas color.
So when you pass it to the next person, hit the menu button, the second one here, and that'll flush it so the next person can start over. And then one of the eccentricities I noticed, pressure is device sensitive. So every Android device has possibly no implementation of pressure support at all, where you'll constantly get like a single constant pressure value, or it has a different threshold range. So I noticed on the Nexus 1 when you run this application, like a little bit of pressure gives you high values close to 1. On the Motorola Droid 2, a little bit of pressure gives you almost nothing, close to 0. So getting the right constant value adjustment for pressure for an application like this is actually pretty tricky. It's device specific, so it's actually quite hard to do the right thing. All right, so we are done with that one. And I'm going to turn it over to my co-presenter to talk a little bit.
I'm going to essentially wrap up pretty fast with a high-level view about some tablets and TV. How many people work on Android applications? Okay, great. You may be wondering, in terms of functionality, there are some things you can do native Android that's not supported by Adobe AIR for mobile. However, you can create native Android applications and then essentially splice that in with your Adobe AIR application, repackage it. There's a sort of sequence of steps that you follow so that you can get that functionality that's available natively in Android that's not available in Adobe AIR. Excuse me. For example, widgets, alarms, notifications, that's basically doable in case you're concerned. As Adobe AIR evolves, it handles more things, of course. Recently, a web view was added in version 2.5.1, which wasn't available in 2.5. So the only thing is that that process of the manual steps is not officially supported by Adobe. However, it does exist in case you want to do that. So anyway, back to the tablets and TV. As you probably have heard, there's lots of predictions going on. 2011 is the year of the tablet. There are at least 100 tablets available. Some, I think, were discontinued. They're pulled because they didn't, I guess, couldn't compete with some of the better high-end models. Most of many of the tablets, I should say, will support Adobe AIR. The ones that don't, of course, the iPad. If you have Android 2.2 or higher, you'll be able to deploy your Adobe AIR applications on tablets. There's also the playbook from RIM, which uses QNX. However, they have built-in support now available through working with Adobe, so you can run your applications there as well. And let me just, very good. So just some of the information about the playbook. And essentially, one of the nice features, I think, is the support for front and rear cameras. A little bit about the dimensions. HTML5, CSS3, I'm not sure how much of that it will support. Basically, some of the basic functionality, I think, is all that you'll get for now, but I'm not 100% sure on that. And available sometime Q1, Q2. We're actually looking forward to that so that we can write some code to run on a playbook, which we can also include in the chapter in the book. A couple of other devices. Cisco, which is an enterprise device, and Samsung Galaxy Tab, another device that we're looking at, the Toshiba. And in case you were wondering, Windows Phone 7 tablets, base tablets rather. There are at least 8 or so. These are recent at the CES conference, I believe. They were announced. And Google TV, we have been working a little bit with that. There's really not much that we can do right now. Not sure what we can mention since we're under NDA. Essentially, it's a browser, Chrome browser, running on your TV, so you can navigate. You can't download anything, so zip files and so forth. Essentially, go to your whatever URL you want to go to, just as you would on your desktop. There's a People of Lava Android TV from Sweden, which came out a couple of months ago. They claim to be the first Android-based TV. And of course, there's Adobe TV. Here's a little bit of information about Google TV. There are 12 bundled applications. So far, we don't have information about how to add new applications to that. We're working on that. And as I mentioned before, no file download capability. Also, you can't take any screenshots. Otherwise, we would have done so in our presentation. What's the availability of the boxes?
They're on sale.
They're on sale? This is actually my favorite. Last year, available in China only. I really want this car. So I guess I have to go over there, get the visa. So it's between 10 and 20K. Android 2.1, actually. I'm not sure how safe it is to drive because, you know, if you can do all this stuff while you're driving, well, take your chances. But it's kind of interesting how it came out over there. And you can, there's the video, the link at YouTube you can watch. It's kind of interesting, actually. And this will be posted, so if you want to, you can take a look at it. The links, I would very, very highly recommend that you go through these. Get your stuff, start doing your application development, and if you get stuck, I would recommend these even more, starting with Stephen, but James Ward, who's an evangelist at Adobe, Dwayne Nickel, likewise, all these guys, lots of code, lots of updates, lots of information. So, and if you can't find it through them, there's forums available, or will be available at some point.
So like I mentioned, that's my blog URL, steveonjava.com. If you put the Flash dot in front of it, that ensures you only get the Flash-oriented articles, not my Agile methodology stuff, which I do for my day job, or my JavaFX stuff, which I do for, you know, Oracle folks. So it's kind of tailored content just for what you've seen here. If you want the whole thing, you can just take the Flash off and just go to steveonjava.com. All right. Thank you very much. You've been a great audience.